My name is John Pfeffer. I work for the Institute for Policy Studies, and we have a program called Global Just Transition. And I'll put that link in the chat once we've gotten started. Um, and as part of that program, we have a group called the Rare Earth Elements Group, Regroup, that focuses on rare earth elements and other strategic and critical minerals, as they're called. And obviously, the two places that have been the focus of attention in recent days and months have been Greenland and Ukraine. And so we decided we'd bring in a couple of experts to give us an update on what's going on. Volodymyr, you are here. Welcome.
Okay, sorry for being late. So we will try to access timely, but some technical maybe interruption. Okay, thank you, sir. Nice to meet you and to see
Nice
you.
to meet you
Okay.
all. Thank
Okay.
you. Um, so I'm going to introduce the two speakers. They're going to give their thoughts for about 10 to 15 minutes, and we'll open it up for questions from all of you. You also can use the Q&A function for your questions, and the chat is also enabled for everybody in case you want to chat with one another. Let me give you quick introductions. I'll put them also in the chat so you have those. Um, Klaus Dodds is a professor of geopolitics at Royal Holloway at the University of London, and he's the co-author of a forthcoming book called Unfrozen, The Fight for the Future of the Arctic, and that will come out with Yale University Press. Volodymyr Vlasiuk is an expert in Ukrainian industry who advises Ukraine's parliament on economic matters, and he's the director of Ukrainian Industry Expertise. I'm going to pass it over to you first, Klaus, and then we'll hear from Volodymyr. And thank you both again for joining us.
Thank you very much, and a pleasure to be joining everybody in this webinar. So I will speak to the Greenland part of the title of this webinar, and just trying to make a few observations that inevitably are going to be dominated by President Trump and some of the comments that have been made by him and others, really, I suppose, from sort of Christmas Day last year. So to put everything into context, this is not the first time, as many will recall, that President Trump has taken an interest in the world's largest island. In 2019, he made the suggestion that the United States would be interested in purchasing Greenland, and that offer was rebuffed at the time by both governments of Denmark and Greenland in Nuuk and Copenhagen, respectively. And of course, there's a longer history and geography to be told about the interest of the United States in Greenland, some of which, of course, has involved previous offers to purchase. And I think many listeners will be aware of, I think, of that history anyway. I think the other thing worth noting is that certainly during the Second World War and in the early years of the Cold War, the United States was also well aware of the strategic resource potential of Greenland. And that partly explains why Harry Truman, for example, offered to purchase the island in 1946. And at that time, the interest was largely in corallite, which was a sort of essential to the manufacture of aluminium. And I think it's just worth noting that the kinds of conversations that we're having now about rare earths strike me at times as actually quite reminiscent of some of the conversations that happened certainly in the 1940s and 1950s about bauxite and aluminium. So there is, I think, there's probably a kind of history and a geography, if you like, to be traced a little bit more explicitly about how large powers, in this case the United States, think about sourcing rare earths or strategic minerals, as they used to be called during the Cold War, and the sorts of relationships that they very deliberately tried to cultivate. In the case of bauxite, for example, very close relationships with small island states like Jamaica and slightly further afield, Guyana. Nowadays, all the focus is on other parts of the world, Ukraine, Greenland, Democratic Republic of Congo, and so on. But in the Greenlandic context, I think why this second administration has really, I think, caught the collective eye is because the tone and tenor of the approach around Greenland has changed somewhat. It's become even more gratuitous, you might say, in terms of what the demand is. But actually, on that point, I think I'd just also like to touch briefly on why some of this is at times quite difficult to make sense of. So when President Trump has said several times now that the United States is going to get Greenland one way or another, it's not always clear what the primary driver is. At times, for example, we've been told it's on the basis of international security. On other occasions, actually, minerals, energy security has been explicitly cited. And yet, on the Christmas Day tweets, for example, arguably there was a broader argument being made here, which really revolved around hemispheric security and a sense that Greenland was part of an American sphere of influence. And actually, the thing that perhaps was underpinning all of this was a desire to make sure that China, for example, never established any kind of economic, political, infrastructural foothold. Now, turning to minerals and Greenland specifically, the story is an incredibly mixed one. So whilst, for example, again, there's a longer history of mining and extraction in Greenland, the current state of play is, you might say, is rather disappointing. So if, for example, President Trump thinks that critical minerals or rare earths are going to be exploited at some point during his second administration, he's likely to be disappointed. As everybody knows, mining, particularly in remote, challenging areas, is a long-term project. And Greenland, I think, is a textbook example of why these things are challenging, why they're often expensive, and why also politics can complicate things. So just to break that down very, very quickly, one is whether you're talking about southern Greenland or anywhere further north, it's an incredibly challenging environment to work in. It's remote from most centers of population. You have a perpetual challenge with an island that only has 57,000 people attached to it. And you don't have the density of infrastructure that you can take for granted in other parts of the Arctic. Secondly, if you look at the experience of licensing, which the government of Greenland is very much in control of, the vast majority of companies and entities that have taken up some kind of license have ended up being disappointed. That's true of oil and gas. That's also true of other minerals. To be perfectly honest, we have about 2 mines at some state of operation, and really, as we get towards the end of the 2020s, one is likely to become operational. The other is still a work in progress, but this is not going to be a quick thing at all. Politically, I think it's also just worth stressing that previous governments of Greenland have stepped back from mining. So in 2021, for example, the government of Greenland, the then government of Greenland, stepped away. There was a huge controversy about uranium, for example. And all of that is to say is it has consequences in terms of commercial confidence, in terms of thinking about whether this is a good long-term bet. So final comments, John, so I don't want to hog too much time. I would offer this. Number one, any mining in Greenland remains a long-term, complex, and expensive business. Number two, President Trump has caused considerable discombobulation within Denmark, within Greenland, and within the wider NATO EU community. And there are important considerations here that go way beyond minerals. If Greenland was to become independent in the future, then I think there will be many Europeans who will worry that the United States will try to shape that independence, or if nothing else, make sure that they become an independent island state under very, very close US supervision. And number three, interestingly, I'll end on this point, the government of Greenland does remain autonomous in a lot of this. And government ministers there have continued to stress that Greenland is open for business, and that openness does not necessarily preclude Beijing. So I predict in all of this is that American pressure on Greenland and Denmark will continue. Minerals are a part of the conversation, but we shouldn't consider that in splendid isolation. And I think whatever happens, it's just worth remembering that when it comes to sourcing critical minerals, there are plenty of other places you'd probably want to turn your attention to first. And Greenland, in my estimation, would be quite some way down the list of where you'd want to start yet another speculative operation. Thanks very much, John.
Excellent. Thank you, Klaus. And so the question then, is Ukraine one of those places that that you might want to look to for exploitation of rare earth elements and other critical raw materials? And for that, we're going to turn to Volodymyr Vlasiuk. Volodymyr, I'm going to ask you to, yes, turn on your camera,
Okay.
and looking forward to your comments. I'll put your bio again in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thanks, John. But I would like to provide you with some presentation. So I have shortly prepared for our conversation and our communication now. So it's technically you must give me maybe some right or not, or we can load the presentation.
I think if you're able to share your screen, you should be. Yes, there you go.
Okay, okay. Okay.
Perfect.
It's good. Okay, you now can see, yes, the picture.
Yes, perfect.
You can see. Okay, okay. So thanks, Klaus, for this previous words. So there is some very important notice from you we have heard. Furthermost, about this difficult accessibility to the deposits which are in Greenland now. So in Ukraine, we have quite opposite situation, and it's very important for the perspectiveness of exploitation and for the mining and extraction of these critical minerals. So now I would like to provide you with some concrete information, because I am the director of a company, Ukrainian Industry Expertise, and in some time, so about 5 years ago, we have elaborated two business projects for some company which was interested in investing in mining of lithium in Ukraine and graphite in Ukraine. And we possess with some concrete information about the effectiveness of such activities in Ukraine. And also we have collected some information about availability of real availability of this rare earth metals or critical minerals in Ukraine. And now I would like to share with you this information, which I hope can be interesting also for you. So the Trump's mineral dream, yes, and spotlight on Ukraine now. Furthermore, I would like to explain maybe about this fantastic figures of $40.8 trillion of critical minerals, which was announced in the mass media. So we are very careful about such amount and fantastic figures, but officially it should be explained as the whole value of all the deposits of all the minerals of the natural minerals in Ukraine. I cannot maybe say that this is true figure or not, but we should speak about the critical minerals and the figure of critical minerals is much more or less than this. So I consider this as some fantastic figures for now. If to speak about Ukraine and namely about the critical minerals, so Mr. Trump used the word rare earth, but we will speak at, we will name this as a critical minerals. Among the United States list of critical minerals, which contain 50 elements, there are 20 positions available in Ukraine. Yes, with a different way of getting for real information. Some of them is jerk, only maybe 3 or 4 deposit. Another estimation is based on the former Soviet Union exploration. Yes, but I should say that this later jerk proved this former and earlier Soviet Union exploration datum. So we can say that they reflect roughly the correct, the real situation and volume of these critical minerals. And getting back to this information, so among these 50 elements, Ukraine have here this with plus and minus, we have pointed this element, barite, beryllium. So if we can see plus and minus, that means that we do not have maybe enough volume of this element in order to conduct some industrial processing of them. But if we will have plus, we have confirmed the amount of these elements in order to build factory and to make some industrial processing activities in Ukraine. And among this element, we have in Ukraine let's say gallium, germanium, graphite, hafnium, lithium, magnesium, manganese, nickel, niobium, and titanium. Okay, and also vanadium. So it's 50 element from the 20 element from the all amount of critical minerals of United States. 50 elements are available in Ukraine. Also, we know that European Union has his own list of critical minerals. So that's roughly the same situation. And to structurize this information, I would like to make some short description. We have, Ukraine really have critical minerals among the above mentioned, which are important for the green and digital transition, for the double transition. So that so-called battery group, we know that battery is a very important product for the green transition. And among them, we do have lithium, graphite, and manganese. We can produce the cathode from using the lithium, and anode lithium the graphite. Together, it's the main component to create the battery, electric battery, and storage facilities. So another group is semiconductor. Its main corresponds with digital transition, economical transition. Gallium and germanium is a constructive element for the microchips, as also as metallic silicon. So this group is also available in Ukraine in order to make some industrial processing, after investing, of course. And the group of so-called strategic construction materials, titanium, zirconium, hafnium, vanadium. So this can contribute really maybe a lot in the world value-added chains in supplying of this material. And now I can give you maybe, if you are interested in some more concrete information, in this table we give the information about the value of critical minerals resource of the battery group in Ukraine. And they are estimated as in primary commodity products. So that's the first commodity products, because we know that through the downstream process, we can process a lot and to produce a number and series of such products to capture the value added, for example, in the territory of Ukraine. But here is the given estimation in the primarily product. For example, lithium. We have 4 deposits in lithium. 3 is in the territory which are controlled in Ukraine, and 1, unfortunately, is a territory where now we do have the battlefield, really. This is Donetsk region. So namely, for this deposit, we have elaborated our business plan. They have a good spodumene ore and deposits, so very favorable for processing. But we give this feature separately because of our wartime situation in Ukraine. And the total amount, so the lithium, the contents of lithium and share of lithium is 1.2, 1.5%, and we have amount of 120 million tons of lithium ore. This is the estimation. And so in lithium, we have correspondingly 15 million tons spodumene and petalite, if we produce spodumene and petalite concentrates. And at the present price, it's 2 billion and $8.5 billion. So we can estimate this as in these figures. If we produce spodumene and petalite concentrates, if we produce through the downstream project more expensive product, so correspondingly this amount will be higher. And for example, natural graphite, also important for producing of cathode to produce the electric battery. We have 6 deposits. 4 of them are in the controlled Ukraine territory, mainly in the central Ukraine. And 2, unfortunately, is in Donetsk and Lugansk region and in the territory which Ukraine does not control now. And the indicator of the amount of the total amount is 245 million tons of graphite ore with the content of graphite 7%. And if we'll produce from this amount of ore, we can produce 13.5 million tons graphite concentrate with the share of graphite 99% or more, and the total price will be $13.5 billion. And manganese. So the 5 deposit, and if we produce from the total amount manganese concentrate, this will be 910 million ton, and the total amount up to $180 billion. So this, of course, is not exact estimation, but they give some understanding of the amount and the value in the present price of this deposit. The same information is regarding the group of critical minerals for the semiconductor production, for the chips production, gallium, germanium, metallic silicon. So the total value at the primary products, which are described in this column, is $43 billion. And here is also we mentioned the amount. And the group of construction, strategic construction, critical minerals in Ukraine, the total sum is up to $20 billion. So the same structure of this table, the amount and the price. I would like also to compare the amount of these critical minerals in Ukraine in proportion to the world known amount and value. And for example, the total resource on the world lithium calculated as for the 100% of lithium is 30 million tons. From this 30 million tons, 1.6 million tons are in Ukraine. So it's about 4 or 5%, something like this, of the total world deposits. And natural graphite, for example, if calculated as of 100 of this graphite, 100%, so the world resource is 290 millions, and Ukraine's share is 13.5 million tons. And manganese, for example, 1,700 million, and Ukraine's share is 430 million. And here we have the list of another element, and we can say that Ukraine's share is from 1 to 5% of the world deposit, something like this. And as for us, it can be essential if this critical mineral will be mined, processed, and if they will participate in the world value-added chains in supplying of these materials. So I will be now shorter, and the latest 3 slides. Also, I would like to stress that it's very important, for example, in the case of Ukraine, to capture value added as maximum as possible in the territory of Ukraine. Here is 3 group of, if we process through different type of these products, this is total estimation of primary product is about $258 billion. If we produce more complicated product and more processed product, the value will be 678. And if you produce, for example, including the cathode, anode, and accumulating battery in Ukraine, the total sum will be more than $1 trillion. And here is the value added capturing process if processed of lithium. This is spodumene and petalite concentrate. The total sum is 8.5. The lithium carbonate and hydroxide, the sum is remarkable more and higher, up to $23.5 billion. And in lithium cathode, the price of this element is $35 billion. So it's very important to capture this value added through this downstream process as much as possible in the territory in Ukraine. And the latest notice is regarding the dominated of China in the world value chain and world value chain of supply of this product. That is the point of concern of United States and the European Union, of course. China is completely dominating. But for example, it's interesting if you look for the manganese. They controlled only 5% of mining, but they control 95% of mineral processing of manganese. Of course, that's maybe overwhelming dominance of this product. And right, we can see the share of the China in the world supply, for example, electrolyte production, separator production, and cathode production. We have a very high percentage of this dominance. And this understandable why a lot of countries, namely United States and Mr. Trump and the European Union, are looking for the safety in supplying of this very important element. And obviously, Ukraine can participate in this process. And here is some conclusion regarding the effectiveness and maybe attractability of this process of mining and processing this mineral in Ukraine. The first one, so Ukraine is really can affect this supply chain, but of course, after investment, after 10 years, after the process of building factories, but the potential of these minerals give Ukraine such position of also strategical supply of these minerals. But it's very important to make the fair and effective play both for Ukraine and for the partners. And the 3 items why this activity is attractive in Ukraine. As I have told before, this is availability of these resources, which are significant and efficient for the construction of processing facilities for the industrial processing. This first point. The second point is, so Klaus has mentioned about this in his speech, this is accessibility to the deposits due to good infrastructure in Ukraine, due to availability of transportation and energy infrastructure. We can get the easily access to this deposit only by constructing maybe 5 or 10 kilometers of the road, or making some electricity grids further for several kilometers, because all the basic infrastructure are available in Ukraine. This is, for example, can be in Siberia or Canada or in Greenland, as it was told before. And third one is competitive cost and high economic efficiency of the project. For example, the efficiency of the project which we have elaborated before, it's 3-4 years in order to paying back all the capital investment in the deposit in Ukraine. So that's why, of course, Ukraine is attractable for this, but it's very extremely important that for Ukrainian people, as owners of this research, to have this very effectiveness and win-win game with our partners. Okay, thank you, sir.
Excellent. Thank you, Volodymyr. That was very, very helpful. I want to remind folks that they can put their questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to start with a question. It was very interesting. It was almost as if I am sitting in the White House and you were both giving me presentations about whether the United States should be interested in investing in Greenland's mineral resources or Ukraine. And my obvious conclusion is that, Klaus, you were telling me stay away because the minerals are not very accessible and it's a fool's errand to go after Greenland's resources. And Volodymyr, you were telling me, please come. We have lots of reasons why the United States or other countries should be interested in the mineral wealth of Ukraine. Obviously, the amount as well as the accessibility to that, especially given the infrastructure in Ukraine. I'm curious in terms of Donald Trump's strategies. Obviously, he often makes kind of aggressive and over-the-top proposals or threats, and then sometimes steps back to offer a more realistic position. That's his negotiating strategy. So I'm curious, both in terms of Greenland and Ukraine, what you expect to be the outcome of Donald Trump's efforts to access these minerals. Klaus, do you think that once Donald Trump discovers that, in fact, it's very difficult to gain access to these minerals, he'll focus on other issues involving Greenland, particularly its location in terms of geostrategy, and forget about minerals altogether? And for Volodymyr, how would you evaluate the current mineral agreement between Ukraine and the United States? Is there ambiguity in this agreement? Is it likely that Ukraine will be able to maintain its sovereign control over mineral deposits and be able to profit from the extraction of these minerals? Or do you think that there might be some way for the United States to gain access to those minerals and for the United States to largely profit from the extraction of these minerals? So let's start with those questions and then we'll go to the Q&A. Klaus, you want to start?
Yeah. Thanks, John. That's a great question. I mean, I think it would be an arresting possibility that I'd be given 10 minutes with President Trump to offer a high level overview about Greenland. I mean, what I would say to President Trump is look, I'd actually play back your own words and your own tweets and statements. So I think there's a number of things here. President Trump has been very clear that he thinks the United States faces an existential threat in the form of China. and that threat has to be addressed directly. And there are lots of different techniques, modalities, areas of opportunity that you can take the fight to China. I think he also thinks, and a series of tweets, I think, pulled this together, that the United States has to be very clear that it has a sphere of influence and that it will need to be potentially ruthless in the pursuit of that. So if you think back to some of those Christmas Day tweets, he linked Canada, Greenland, the Panama Canal, and I think sort of paradoxically for a climate change skeptic president, a melting Arctic, because he was talking about northern waterways. So I think fundamentally what drives Greenland in terms of Donald Trump's geopolitical imagination, and I think it's worth recalling, this is a president, by the way, who likes maps, globes, charts. That was, I think, a wonderful insight that a number of people who served in his first administration brought to the fore. So I think there's also a real estate optic to all of this. You know, as anybody knows, the Mercator projection makes Greenland look even bigger than it is. I mean, it is 3 times the size of Texas. I mean, it's a big island, but it's probably not quite as big as Donald Trump thinks it is. So, one, Trump wants to be immortalized in US history as the president who made America bigger. The Trump purchase, if you will. I'm sure that drives some of that. 2, I've said it before, absolutely wants to keep China out of Greenland. Remember, Greenland did flirt, if I can put it like that, with Chinese investment, Chinese business. There was talk at one stage about China investing and purchasing airports, maybe purchasing an abandoned naval station. That's a red line. There is a geostrategic importance to Greenland that has been recognized since 1951. So, as I said before, my opening comments, it's never just about minerals. Finally, what I would say is that I think there is nonetheless, and I think this partially explains the comments about Canada as well, a recognition that if you want to reduce the vulnerability that you feel around supply chain, then of course it makes sense to try and absolutely take control of resources that you know in the future you are going to need more of. So I think proximity matters, and I think there is this sense in which the United States, in one form or another, has to exercise hemispheric dominance. So in that sense, I think things like the Monroe Doctrine are very much back in fashion.
Excellent, thank you. And your reminder of Trump's fascination with maps is useful. I'd like to say that Trump compares himself to other kind of land-grabbing leaders around the world, and he can say to Vladimir Putin, for instance, "You have grabbed the Donbass." He can say to Benjamin Netanyahu, "You have grabbed Gaza." But look, in comparison, Greenland is enormous, much bigger than the Donbass, much bigger than Gaza Strip. I am the leader in terms of territorial acquisition. That might be something playing in his mind. Volodymyr.
Well, that's we are also afraid of that in some aspects, Mr. Trump acts like the Putin. They grabbing territory for the American continent. I will grab territory in the my continent, and this is dangerous for us situation. I can clearly foreseen or make some forecasting what will be in the future. We hope for the future, and of course we believe in our victory because we do not have another way. But it's really dangerous situation and unexpected for all of us regarding namely of the United States, which is a leader in the democratic world. So, and getting back to this agreement, which was ratified in our parliament yesterday. Yes, so, and it was the dominant of the voting more than it's necessary, so-called constitutional share, more than 2/3 share, more than 300 our parliamentarians has voted for. So this unanimous supporting. And of course, we can consider this in the context of the present wartime situation in Ukraine. If the situation and circumstances would be another. So, and the general frame and composition of this agreement also should be another. Now, how I am, for example, consider this in the present situation. This gives Trump the instrument to continue in the war support of Ukraine with the military equipment supplying of Ukraine, because he can say, Mr. Biden has given free this for Ukrainian. This is the man. This is the money of all you Americans, and we'll give for Ukrainian. So, and we'll take aside this momentum that Ukraine is fighting for the freedom, for the democracy, and so on. Let's say, and this agreement give him the instrument to continue and to explain somehow to the American people that now we are not for the free give the weapon of Ukraine, but we'll take back our payment for this so-called through the mechanism of this agreement. Yes, and for Ukrainian and the present moment, for us it's maybe the way to continue to cooperation, military cooperation, which are extremely important for Ukraine, because without this cooperation we don't know what will be in the future, but we are fighting, of course. And so from this point of view, this is explained such unanimous supporting and of this agreement among the Ukrainian parliament. Yes, and I can criticize the element of this agreement, but of course, Mr. Trump used this situation in order to make, to have this part of deal, as he would like to say. But if, for example, if this agreement bears something dangerous for Ukraine, I can identify some items. For example, there is nothing in this agreement regarding the contribution of United States in the form of investment or some in this fund which should be created, Fund for Reconstruction of Ukraine. We can suspect that it means that all the amount of the weapon which will be bring to Ukraine will consider as a part of contribution of the United States in this Fund of Reconstruction. But Fund of Reconstruction, the aim of this fund and mission is to reconstruct Ukraine. Yes, the defense of Ukraine is some another part of the issue. But now we do have the mixture of these two understanding in the in this approach. The second one is that there is nothing in Ukraine in this agreement as a principle about the maximum capturing of value added in the territory of Ukraine. For example, if we'll make some estimation of some part of some portion of weapon which will be bring in Ukraine, yes, and so we do have some the parity from Ukraine as the same part of this money. So if we'll produce lithium cathode, or if we produce some primary product, it's big difference. We can simply, through this mechanism, to miss our chance to make this value added in the territory of Ukraine and just to bring our raw materials abroad for the value added created in some another places. And this mechanism should be pointed maybe as a principle of the working of this fund, that Ukraine should benefit as the owner, and Ukrainian people as the owner of this deposit should benefit maximum through the creating value added in Ukraine. And also it must be clear statement that there is some statement, it's very good, that this fund will work in the interest of Ukraine and Ukraine reconstruction. But in some previous version of this agreement, which was was signed after this scandal in the White House, there is one point that that fund make investment only in the territory of Ukraine. Now we do not have such clear statement in this agreement. So this is the main principle, which are the main which should be the matter of concerns of Ukraine. But we will have, of course, further steps in order to elaborate more clearly and in more detail this agreement. And this is very serious and professional job for our diplomat and economist, because the first variant, it was awful. It's makes no sense to science, which was first time to provide it to Ukraine. We were very strange to see such strange document now. So Ukraine has refused, but we will have a very difficult way. And also, it's very important point. This agreement should not create any barriers for Ukraine access to European Union, because our European Union colleagues also would like to make our win-win project in exploration and processing of these deposits. But some maybe character of this agreement now that American would like to have some dominance position in order to choose the most attractive deposits for the processing and exploitation in the future. So we have a very difficult job ahead of us. But latest word, but Ukraine need partnership, need technology, need investment in order to have the profit from these natural resources which we have now in Ukraine. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. That's very helpful. And especially the point on value added. I mean, in your presentation, you showed the real difference in the amount of money that can be raised by Ukraine between exporting only raw material versus semi-finished and finished products. So it's very important for Ukraine to retain that ability to export higher value added materials. Also, as you point out, in negotiations with the European Union, Ukraine wants to bring something to the table in order to fast track, if possible, membership in the European Union. So obviously mineral resources is going to be an important part of that package. So it's very helpful that you've pointed that out. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A. They basically come down to three questions. One is the environmental consequences of mining. The second would be the labor conditions under which the mining takes place. And the third, specifically rare earth elements. We've talked a great deal about various critical materials, including graphite and lithium, but the question was specifically about those 17 elements known as rare earth elements, which China has a particular monopoly over. It obviously has a control over a lot of processes and extraction for a range of critical materials. But the choke point for, especially from the Trump administration, is rare earth elements, not so much because of green transition, because the Trump administration doesn't care anymore about green transition, but because rare earth elements are a critical component in our military industry. And for China to hold control over those components is considered to be a challenge to our national security. But let's start with environmental consequences, because both of you can address that. Obviously, there are a lot of environmental consequences to mining in general. Greenland, it's a relatively pristine area. I must imagine there's a lot of concern about the environmental consequences of ripping up the ground there. So I'm curious, Klaus, if you can talk about that. And Volodymyr, I'm curious whether the current mining that takes place, as well as the mining that could take place in the future, is there an environmental a set of environmental regulations that govern the extraction of minerals, and whether there is increasing concern. Obviously, Ukraine is in a war, and the war has environmental consequences as well. So this is an unusual situation to talk about mining, but whether there are discussions taking place in Ukraine about the environmental consequences of the mining that's imagined. But let's start with Klaus in Greenland.
Yeah, no, thanks, John. I think the first thing I would caution against is describing anywhere in the Arctic as pristine. That's not a framing I recognize. I think there are two reasons for saying that. Number one is whether we like it or not, when you look at ice cores taken from the Greenlandic ice sheet, what you discover is a record actually of lead and other pollutants ending up being tracked and traced in Greenlandic ice, much of which goes back to the Roman era. So one response is to say that actually Greenland has borne the brunt in one form or another of past centuries of extraction and usage of various minerals, and that's trapped in Greenlandic ice as we speak. And of course, that's also melting. So actually, those pollutants, if you will, within Greenlandic ice are making their way through the island and into, for example, neighboring sea as we speak. Now, on the other hand, to take a more contemporary focus, that reaction, that visceral reaction to uranium mining in the 2021 Greenlandic election doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not as if everybody suddenly went anti-mining in terms of sentiment. You know, there were lead and zinc mines in Greenland going back 50 or 60 years, and they are still causing, well, they still have, sorry, pollution-like consequences. So in certain parts of southern Greenland in particular, there is a legacy of toxic mining. People haven't forgotten. They're living with those consequences, in some cases because those mines were not that far away from communities. So I think it's really important to bear in mind that when there was that very public shift and that as I say, that visceral reaction against uranium extraction, it came against, if you like, or came in the aftermath of that sort of longer history of discontent and unhappiness about the toxic consequences of mining. And the other thing to add to that, because you mentioned labor, I mean, that's also a point of sensitivity as well, because Greenland is a nation of only 57,000 people. So you've always got this challenge of fly in, fly out workforces. That's not, of course, that's also not unique to Greenland per se, but it does create anxieties about what kind of labor force are you going to import? Where are these people going to be staying, for example? How are they going to be supported? And that's a story across the Arctic as well about the ramifications of mining.
Thank you. And I'm really distressed that you have eliminated my vision of Greenland as pristine. I'm going to have to, rethink my whole concept of Greenland. But thank you for that, because that's very useful to understand the larger history of the accumulation of toxicity in Greenland and in the ice deposits there. Volodymyr, question about the kind of environmental consequences also in the chat. Anna Ackerman, who works with Eco Action in Ukraine, notes that oil and gas are part of the Ukraine-US deal as well. So it's a full spectrum extraction agreement, so not just minerals. But I'll pass it on to you to talk about environmental consequences.
In the agreement, in the appendix to the agreement, there were included a lot of elements which are not available in Ukraine, but they are included in the list of as appendix to this agreement, draft agreement, which was ratified. Yes, there is not such element in Ukraine, but they are put there and set by American side, as I understand now. But if to speak about this environmental and pollution points of view and issues, of course, Ukraine have a number of traps, so-called, not only military. We do have now our obligation under accession to the European Union, and also with maybe more strict regulation regarding the environmental and pollution. And at the same time, the development of mining and processing of critical minerals is not friendly for the environment, of course, especially, for example, so-called process to processing of spodumene concentrate. It's enough not friendly this production. But what is good news that the technology is make better constantly is better in this process. And if we have developed this our business plan, we have mentioned that the pollution matter was the most costly in this project which we have performed for one company. But now, after 7 years, we have discovered that there are much more effective technologies which make this and make the better possibilities to provide this processing not dangerous, not so much dangerous for the environment. So technology is very important, and we hope that in this process we will cooperate with our partners, because it's technological countries and developed countries, in order to invest as much as possible in the technology which reduce this pollution in Ukraine. And of course, maybe such strict demands from European Union can be not now possible for Ukraine. And so it's also the matter of negotiation in order to make some roadmap and some way in order to be adapted for this regulation now. And I can agree with you that this component of environment and the model of equipment which reduce this pollution is very important for this project. And of course, we should take into account the social points, the social questions, because Ukrainian people is educated and read a lot, and they can simply protest against such production and such construction of such factories. So it's very important to have political support, local support, and of course the explanation that the benefit which be much more better, that maybe this not very good side that's regarding this pollution. And of course explain that this is pollution which not will be dangerous for the health, for the social stability, because it's a Ukrainian people is read a lot about this, of course. But we hope that we will organize it total and social support of this projection now. John.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And it's a good reminder of the environmental regulatory framework that the European Union provides. It is certainly a way of raising standards in countries that are awaiting membership or going through the accession process. But of course, I believe Greenland also has to meet the EU regulatory framework, since it falls under Denmark, a member. Let me ask you another question from Anna Ackerman of Eco Action. We've talked about states, we've talked about the US state and its involvement in both Ukraine through the agreement and of course, Greenland through Donald Trump's statements. We haven't really talked about corporate interest, which companies are interested in exploration or exploitation of mineral resources in both Greenland and Ukraine. And whether, because obviously, most important for these companies is profitability, and they're not going to be involved in either the surveying or the extraction if they don't think it's going to be profitable. So I'm curious which companies have been interested in Greenland and which companies are lining up, especially foreign companies, are lining up to immediately take advantage of the US-Ukraine mineral agreement, if you know these answers. Let's start with Klaus.
Yeah, so there have been a variety of companies that have been interested in Greenland and its resource potential. Some of them are Anglo-American. There are ones like Green Rock, Amarok Minerals, Critical Minerals Corp. There's a whole bunch of them, and I think it's probably safe to say it's a multinational affair. They involve North American companies, Australian, European. So Greenland, in the recent past, has had actually no shortage of companies interested in both minerals and oil and gas exploration, licensing over the last 20 odd years. So it's genuinely a sort of multinational affair. I would just say, John, I think 2021 was challenging in the sense that when the elected government of Greenland moved away from uranium mining in particular, that did leave some companies rather exposed, and actually, in at least one case, profoundly irritated by the scale of loss, given millions of dollars had been spent on drilling and investment. What we know about resource evaluation in Greenland largely comes through the work of the Geological Survey of Denmark and Greenland. So this is not an island that has been lacking when it comes to mapping, surveying, resource evaluation. The bit I would just caution about is in many parts of the world, and Greenland is absolutely typical, there is also a little bit of a tendency on the part of commercial enterprises to engage in boosterism. And it's it's quite interesting when you read various estimates about what the rare earth value might be of Greenland, you might alight upon figures of 30 billion US dollars, 70 billion US dollars. So I would treat a lot of this with a degree of healthy skepticism. It wouldn't be the first time that companies have tried to talk up the value of their licenses and their investment. And as I say, the return on investment in Greenland is not a quick one.
Yes, that is an important reminder, and Volodymyr gave us a really clear picture of what the real potential value of minerals in Ukraine are, in contrast to this enormous figure that has been put out there by boosters of one sort or another. So, Volodymyr, do you have a picture of what companies, especially foreign companies, have already expressed interest in moving in? And also, um, you obviously have mentioned that a number of these sites are in the Donbass, and the question also is, obviously this is a wartime situation, but is the likelihood that Russia would move in to begin extraction at those sites? Are those likely sites of extraction, or would it probably simply focus on its existing sites and elsewhere in Russia? Though it was interesting that you said that Ukraine's mineral wealth is more accessible than Russian mineral wealth because the infrastructure is lacking in places like Siberia. So that was an interesting point as well. So let me pass it over to you to hear about kind of corporate interest in extraction.
Well, so for sure, the Ukrainian deposits is more accessible, and they're more attractive because we do have maybe somewhere in Siberia these deposits which can be reached, and it needs a lot of capital investment and a lot of time in order to get accession there. But in Ukraine, as I was told before, is quite another situation. For example, the Shevchenkova, so-called, which are bordering near the border of Dnipropetrovsk and Donetsk region, where so we have the road and electricity right near these deposits and near the potential location for these factories, maybe 1 kilometer. It's fantastic. And of course, we have slightly spoken about the possibility to get the labor forces and our skill specialists. And there are enough skill specialists in the frame of, at that time, in the Donetsk region, which was controlled of Ukraine. It's quite enough. And engineering staff also. And if to speak about the present, you have, as I have understood, you have asked about the present activity of Russia occupying forces in the Ukrainian territory. No, they have not started any extraction and any processing of these critical minerals. Also, we can see some activity of Chinese companies, or not companies, some guys, which are trying to extract in the only coal. Yes, to make some portion of coal and make business about this. So it's maybe this is not the serious process for now. But of course, Russia know about this Shevchenkova deposit and another one, because they have the access to this old former Soviet Union datum and information, and they would like also to control this. And the main point of attacks is a Ukrainian industry, potential industry rich and promising territory. Now, that's why we should defend our territory. And if to speak about the potential interest of company, yes, maybe I'll not name you concrete name of the company, but I can say that the company from United States, from Germany, and from the Japan are interested a lot in investing in Ukrainian deposits now. And also we have some previous history. Slightly, it was the history of access when two companies, Shell and Chevron, has entered to the Ukraine in 2013, 2014. They have entered to explore and to extract the gas through this technology, special technology, slants gas. I don't know maybe exactly the word in the English, but they start the activity in Kharkovska and Donetsk region. But unfortunately, this intervention of the Russia in 2014 has stopped this process. So I can assume that also one of the aim of this action was to stop this investment, foreign investment in Ukraine also. But it was very good history. This is two serious companies, Shell and Chevron, and also Ukraine have good instrument for attracting this investment, so-called the special agreement for sharing of the product. This agreement should be set between investors, foreign investors, and Ukrainian government. And any element of this future cooperation can be made as a statement in this agreement. And what is important, the jurisdictions can be not Ukrainian, but foreign. It's very important. For example, Netherlands or London or something like this. It's very important point. And the last word regarding this question, the side and the which was authorized to sign the agreement from the United States was DFC, Development Finance Corporation of United States. So as I know, this financial corporation as a state entity can also invest, and they of course have very close contact to another United States investors. And this of course in the first line, this agreement can give the way for the United States investors also. And DFC personnel, I know that DFC is investing everywhere in the world in the location which are interested for United States government. Okay.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I think Chevron and Shell were interested in the shale resources, so probably fracking in order to access that natural gas. In our last 15 minutes or so, I want to shift over to kind of focus on geopolitics more generally. We have a question about the DRC, about Congo, and obviously there's a lot of mineral resources in Congo, and those are being accessed as we speak, and infrastructure being put there. And Congo also in a state of war, so it's not easy necessarily to build that infrastructure at this time. But I'm curious from both of you to reflect on how the situation in Greenland and the situation in Ukraine will affect this kind of global race for minerals and for access to minerals, as well as the pressures that are on countries simply to provide raw materials. We're familiar, of course, with the situation in Indonesia. Indonesia tried to ban the export of raw nickel, and it was brought by the European Union to the World Trade Organization, which ruled against Indonesia. And so there's pressure, not just by individual countries, but by the global trading system to make it difficult, or more difficult, not impossible, but more difficult for countries to rise higher in the value chain. So to take into consideration these two issues, the scramble for resources and the pressures on countries simply to provide raw materials. How would you kind of situate Greenland in the first case and Ukraine in the second? So that's the first question, and then I'm going to probably end with a question about China. Klaus.
Well, again, I think you heard me earlier in this webinar talk about the Cold War. And let me just again just provide that as a bit of historical referencing. What has arguably changed is that we now talk more about the United States, China, and the European Union, whereas 60, 70 years ago, we would have talked about the United States and the Soviet Union. And we could tell a similar story of those two then superpowers looking to acquire strategic minerals of all sorts, and actually yet again the global South being at the heart of those competitive endeavors, whether it was Southeast Asia, whether it was Southern Africa, for example. So to a certain extent, there's a certain sort of déjà vu to all of this. You know, the names change, but the impulse remains the same, which is trying to create supply chain resilience. I mean, that's the term we probably use nowadays. But I think successive US presidents actually identified the securing the supply of certain resources to be an imperative. That was certainly true, for example, of the Kennedy administration when it came to places like Ghana, for example. And again, bauxite actually loomed large, aluminium smelting. Partly that was linked to dam construction, for example, because of the enormous amount of power and cooling required. So there's that element. With the DRC, I mean, I think it is unfortunately true that is probably again at the epicenter of land, resource, territorial conflict. And there's no doubt there is a scramble for influence and impact in the DRC. It does involve China, it does involve the European Union, the United States, but it also involves regional actors such as Rwanda. And because of the sheer enormity of the country and the kind of the scale of resource interest, I'm afraid I think we will see geopolitical agitation prevail in that particular country for some time yet. Now, to link it to Greenland, I think what I'm trying to say is that whilst Greenland looks more of a long-term bet, I've tried to, in this webinar, say I don't think minerals are the driving factor at the moment. I think it is more about this sense of hemispheric security and just stopping China get a foothold in the North American hemisphere, if I can put it like that.
Excellent. Volodymyr.
Okay, our available figures indicate that Ukraine can influence this world value chain of supply of these critical minerals, taking into consideration the amount of these reserves and Ukrainian deposits. And also this quite obviously that our United States and European Union has lost the time when the China has made a very impressive step ahead in to reach this deposits and to take the control over this world value chain supply lines. Yes, and now they are continue to look around the world and to look for the another deposits and reserves. And we know that China is very active in the Africa also, and the Middle and the Africa now. And I have recently seen a list with some new points and area of China activities in South Africa. And another, of course, one very serious events. This is more and more close cooperation of China and Russia. So we know that now Russia is, of course, is in most weak position regarding the China. Yes, which is contradict to the situation when it was the former Soviet Union now. And we know that a lot of Chinese workers and people are working in Russia territory, and we can see some expansion, slow expansion of China through the Russia territory, especially in Siberia. So we know that population of Russia after the Urals mountain is this immense territory, only about 20 million people, only about 20 million people. It's maybe unpopulated territory. And China, which has very impressive density of the population. And but China is now profiting a lot, buying the natural resources from Russia at the cheap price, and they demand at the inner domestical price to be used as an export price to the China now. And at the same time, for now, they refuse to invest in some serious geopolitical project, like a force of Siberia too. So because Putin are inclining to have such cooperation, but as I know, China refused to enter this project. They would not like to build new factories and production activities in Russia. They would like also to sell to the Russia automotive product, computers, electronics, and so on. And that is the big difference between the approaching while cooperation of Russia with the Western world, which can be very generous in building factories, opening new enterprise, and this is quite different position from the China. But I am almost sure that China will use the possibility to grab this possibility to reach to the good deposits of the Russia. Maybe we will need some more information about this, but of course this will make the China even maybe more powerful in controlling of this value chain of these critical minerals. And every country should be very careful. So that's why Ukraine, of course, is important in this situation. And this geopolitical process has become more and more, the temp of this process is more and more extensive now. So we should be careful. Of course, we would like for the possibility to cooperate between West and East. And we would not to see such a split between democratic countries, some not democratic countries. We should cooperate, of course, but it's not our choice. And now it's necessary to put maximum effort for resilience of these chains of supply of critical materials. Okay.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap up with one last chance for you to make any concluding remarks. And I mean, you basically answered my question about China, though I am curious to know if there are any signs of Chinese footprint, shall we say, in Greenland or in Ukraine. Volodymyr, you mentioned that it's in Ukraine's interest not to divide the world so clearly between East and West. There is the agreement between the United States and Ukraine, but perhaps there are some other examples of cooperation with China around infrastructure development in Ukraine today. I don't know. Maybe you can tell us. And Klaus, you said, minerals, maybe not such a short-term profitable enterprise in Greenland. but Greenland very critical in terms of geostrategy, keeping China out. Well, you know, keeping China out is not so easy in most parts of the world. China's already in, major trading partner for most of the world, Southeast Asia, Latin America, parts of Africa. What are we seeing in terms of Chinese uh, business or state-led enterprise penetration in Greenland, or cooperation therein? Let's start with you, Klaus.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think if we'd had a webinar entitled "Fish" or "Seafood," then and Greenland, then we would have talked about China for virtually the whole session. So I think there are two answers to this very briefly, given our time constraints. One is China has next to no physical presence in Greenland, full stop. But the most important export of Greenland is seafood, and China is the key market. So the government of Greenland, whatever political complexion, recognizes that fundamental economic reality. And if Greenland wants to become an independent country at some point, and I believe it does, then it's got to do two things. One is find a replacement for the block grant that is an annual transfer of about 500 million euros that Denmark makes to Greenland. Got to find ways to replace that. That's fundamental. And number two, you don't want to alienate your biggest consumer of seafood unnecessarily. So Greenland is walking a tightrope, knowing that there are certain red lines the United States in particular will not tolerate in the world's largest island.
Tightrope. Tightrope is probably an apt metaphor as well for Ukraine. Volodymyr, what can you tell us about the current relationship between Ukraine and China?
Okay. Yes, we do have our own experience in cooperation with the China now, and also China is the second, the biggest external foreign trade partners after European Union. If we'll put together, consider as one market, because the share of European Union is 59% in Ukraine export total. In the China is up to 7-8%, so it's the biggest partners after this. Because after this, that Russia has disappeared from our radar of this our foreign trade. Yes, and China would consume, of course, at the first line Ukrainian foodstuff product and the grain of wheat, a grain of corn as a consumer. And before this war, before 2021, Ukraine has considered by China as a strategic supplier of this product of grain to the China, because China need more and more food stuff and food product to be imported. And also one of the aim of Ukraine in that time, not for now, because this is situation, war situation, and yes, supporting from China to Russia this aggression. Yes, for Ukraine it will be also attractive to have the position of strategical supplier of the food products into the China. Not only the raw grain of corn and wheat, but China would like to have raw grain and feed and to capture value added and its own territory. He is very strong in this policy. But we will have to agreement to supply, for example, sunflower oil, because Ukraine is the biggest supplier of sunflower oil to the China. But if we'll look at the detail of the contract which are proposed by China, for example, so-called infrastructure contracts, they propose very cheap money for a long time. But in this supply, they are very closely connected with all the components on the product, even working forces to be buy in the China. Yes. And if we, for example, we will get access to such cheap manner, and for example, they will build the metro station in Ukraine, but we know that our producers will be a part and a side of this process. And after this, technologically, we will get dependence from the China. China is very hard in this position. and it's make difficult to make some serious agreement with these countries. So, but of course, it's a powerful country, and this creation of barriers by Mr. Trump is not very good step. And from the economical point of view, of course, nobody will benefit from this, including the United States, because barrier makes the barrier to make profit from this, to benefit from the world trade. We know that globalization will take the possibility for a lot of countries to make so-called economical miracles, because they can sell their value added using the international trade and using the purchasing capacity of the world. So my last words can be that we hope that everything will be normalized, and this is not normal from United States to make such harsh barrier. Yes, if not to say some in other words. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you both. I think not normal is a good description of what the Trump policy is. Unfortunately, we can definitely confirm that from here in the United States. I want to thank you both, Klaus and Volodymyr, for presenting today. This has been extremely helpful, extraordinarily useful. We will make a video of this and post it, and I'll send that around. And I'll follow up with you as well about a written summary of your remarks. I want to thank as well all the participants and your excellent questions. Please follow the link to our Global Just Transition site if you want more information about the work that we do. Once again, thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to being in touch with you about our next event in this series.